know, since there's a lot of men sitting here, you'll understand what I'm talking about. It's like when you go buy a bookshelf and it looks really nice. You go to your local Walmart or whatever and you see this really cheap bookshelf and you want it, and you buy it and you take it home and you see the instructions, throw them over your shoulder, and it's like, anybody could put this thing together. And after about 3 hours later, you go find the simple instructions because it was designed in a way that could only go together one way, and any other way it won't even hold together. Well, that's what life is like sometimes. People just took the instructions, either threw them over their shoulder, or no one even offered them the instructions on how to manage and make decisions in life. And I would say, for the most part, people were never offered proper instruction. So they didn't even have the opportunity to throw it over their shoulder. They just didn't even have it. They do the best they can with what they've been taught in their lives. And of course, we're talking about leadership, and that's what we've been talking about in this section, chapter 4 of the Build a More Excellence unit. And we've discussed, Catan talked about some things that will help develop. Sadly, you can develop negative character or negative leadership, or you can develop positive leadership. And that's what William had talked about. We went over that last class. And of course, certain things you find in a positive leader, you will not find in a negative leader. And things you find in a negative leader, you'll never find in a positive leader. And that's something that we have to be very mindful about when we're developing our characters and we're striving, working very hard to get these things put into our lives. You'll never see a positive leader be immoral or selfish. You'll never see them try to be deceitful, hateful, or revengeful. Those are things that you're not going to see in a positive leader. But I want you to, here in the United States, and I'm amazed, actually, how many people are paying attention to the switching over from one president to another and a new administration coming in. I was amazed this last week. I got so many messages from overseas, people actually sending emojis of blowing trumpets and rejoicing like parties with party hats, and the world's going to be a better place because Trump's in office now. And I thought, I'm amazed at how many other countries literally pay attention to what goes on in the United States, because their economy either succeeds or fails in what the United States does. And of course, these people, they're not worried about the policies here in the United States outside of how it affects their country. And we talked about that last class. What's in each country's best interest? Well, a positive leader isn't like that. A positive leader is worried about what's in the interest of everyone, all human life. Remember the very basic categories of morality. Behavior and attitude towards all life is one of them, not just behavior and attitude toward my fellow Americans. Well, there's a lot of Americans. There's also South Americans. And most of those Americans came from Europe to begin with. There's very few indigenous people in South America or even here in North America. So when you think about how these things work out, we're so knitly tied together. But I would, especially the young men here who have an opportunity to see another change of an administration. This is very ironic, though, that what we're seeing here is that you had an administration, it was changed to a different one, and now it's changing back. And it's very rare in the United States to actually experience this. And the reason I bring this up, pay attention to how things change very quickly because of a leader who come into office. The ideology that takes place. I thought it was very interesting today when I heard, used to be Senator Marco Rubio, now it's Secretary of State Marco Rubio, one of the first instructions given to all embassies was the removal of any flag except the American flag, because the embassies have been flying many different types of flags, some to be provocative, some to be supportive of certain lifestyles, and that was the first instruction that was given. Take those things down. Only American flags fly at our embassies. And of course, it was replacing what another president had said. And that's just one example. You're going to see a lot of things, but when you get into this, it becomes, well, who has the better character? Does President Trump have a better character than President Biden did? Does President Putin, is his character better than Prime Minister Netanyahu? Is Mahmoud Abbas really a bad person, or is his character better? Is Xi Jinping? And then you can just keep going down the line. Well, who has a better character? Well, who's looking to build morality? And of course, what's going to make a leader? What's going to help develop a leader? How are we going to develop this leadership? This is something that we really have just a huge opportunity to sit back and watch right now and watch how these things transition. Even in our city here, in Abilene, Texas, something that was said on the news yesterday made massive headlines, and very few people knew about it here in the state of Texas. Even in the city of Abilene, very few people knew about it. But they released the information about a huge facility in developing AI here in Abilene, Texas. It's the first place they're doing it. And they've been doing it for over a year now, building the facility. It's a massive facility, and it's just located north of I-20 here in Texas, where we live. And it's amazing. They got all this stuff done, and very few people even knew about it. Even some people on the city council, they might have knew about it and just ignored it. It wasn't really in the city, so they didn't really care to know about it. It was outside city limits. But this is huge when you think about the impact that these things have on a society, an economy, and how things on this scale can get done and no one knows about it. It's done right there. Nobody's hiding that it's taking place, but very few people knew about it. The reason I bring this up, though, is because when people make decisions, we're talking billions of dollars of decisions. Well, who are they looking to benefit, and what is it looking to do? What's the end goal of a decision? Looking back over here to page 154, just to put a few things back into our minds really quickly, reading this between losing my voice and trying to get through it. If you look at the first paragraph again, notice here the question was, can you be a leader, at the very top of the page? And the answer was a resounding yes. And it said, developing leadership skills is more than just preparing for a career in the future. You can use the skills of leadership to improve your life right now, and notice, encourage others to improve theirs as well. It doesn't mean tell everybody else what they're doing wrong and follow me because I'm doing everything right. And, we're all growing together. We're developing together. Now, there might be some that are more developed due to the education that they have, the time that they've spent learning, and some that might not be. And that's something we have to be mindful of also. The greatest failure you can have as a teacher, as a leader, is when you meet someone, and the author of The Peaceful Solution told a group of us teachers that were in a meeting one time, he said the greatest problem you can have as a leader is when you meet someone or you meet a group of people and you expect them to have the same knowledge or be on the same scale of knowledge as you do at that time. And you might have been studying and working for 30 years to get what you're at, and you expect someone else to already have been there. He said, never forget where you come from. Never forget your educational level you were at, because all of these things must be built and developed. And you have to not take for granted that people know how to make a right choice or know how to handle certain situations. Be very patient, caring, compassionate, and explain those situations. Because what sounds like common sense to one person might not be so much common sense to another. And it takes education to bring these things about. A lot of patience and a lot of education. But once again, it said by developing leadership skills, developing them. Remember, nurturing, growing, like a construction site there. You're really growing it and solidifying it. You will gain the confidence to make decisions that will help you maintain your positive character. You will also have the self-assurance to take the initiative to stand up for what is right, even if it means standing up against your peers. Now, when it says standing up, it doesn't mean you throw a shotgun over your shoulder and you're walking in a room and you're going to take your stand, and it doesn't mean that you stand up and scream and yell and put people down. That's very easy to do. It's the worst thing in the world to do, but it's very easy to do. And of course, everybody in the room gets to see what an idiot looks like. And of course, if you've ever done it, when you leave, you know what an idiot feels like. It's something that's very easy to do, and you can regret it for a long time when these things take place, because it's really, if you ever allow yourself to do this on a work site, in your own home, wherever you're at, it's like we talked about in the last class. If you could imagine, and this is the way I heard a teacher of the Peaceful Solution say this one time, and I was able to picture it in my mind. It made a lot of sense of having a massive pile of sand, and you start shoveling over to the other side. Why? Because it's something you have to do. And you shovel and you get like half of this huge pile of sand moved over to the other side. Then you slip up and do something really negative, really bad. And it's like, as you're shoveling, there's a dump truck to bringing it back and dumping it back in your pile again. That's what it's like to slip up, to do something negative, to do something that's detrimental, something that's immoral. That's how much you reverse yourself. You take yourself back way, 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 way back into where, in the Peaceful Solution, you have to re-educate in what you need to do and the decisions that need to be made. And the challenge that you might face is not everyone might not agree that character education is necessary. That's some of the greatest challenges you might face in life, that I don't need nobody telling me that. I know what to do. I don't need nobody telling me. That stuff's for children. Well, I tell you what, we act like children a lot of times. And if you've never seen adults act like children, there's certain political channels you can watch, and you can see it all day long. And these are people that control nuclear weapons, and they act like children every second of the day, it seems like. I'm kind of amazed at how bad it gets. But keep in mind that one thing a leader does, looking down here to the third paragraph, the very last sentence, leaders are people who have the courage to take on responsibilities, complete tasks, and encourage and organize others to work along with them. Doesn't mean that you're always right in what you see that a person needs to do, or a group of people needs to do, or an ideology that you might have. I've found throughout my life that having an idea is a great thing. But when your idea is discussed amongst other people who have the same desires of pushing forth moral character education, your idea becomes a really great idea. But you can get the very basis of it, but other people can give their inputs on it, and it really helps to make everything strong. It really helps. And you'll find that you'll always leave open doors to what you're trying to do or what you think should be done. Open doors that could bring in problems. So you try to close those doors and you try to eliminate the problems, because that's whenever you want to change something or you want to go a different direction in something, it's because there's a problem. If you're going down a smooth road with no problems, why would you get off of it? It's only when it gets bumpy and the potholes get big and the road starts falling apart that you start looking to go a different way. And sometimes it's as simple as, I got off that smooth road when I wasn't supposed to get off of it. I should have stayed on it. I made a bad choice and now I'm living with it. But these leaders, they have the courage to take on responsibility. They don't blame other people for what occurred. They take on the responsibility for what's going on, even for those that are under them, as far as being led by them. And looking down here to the second to last paragraph, it says, taking on any role of leadership that you have been assigned with a positive attitude can prepare you for a future position of authority. And it's not the I'm in charge syndrome. That can be a disease if you're not careful. I'm in charge syndrome. And I'll never forget, William talked about it. The author of The Peaceful Solution really solidified it in my mind. I don't know how many times I would hear him say, I don't care who's in charge. Go find who was responsible. That's who I want to talk to, because they're the only ones that's going to fix it. The people in charge, well, they wouldn't be responsible, we wouldn't have got here to where we're at. And it was something to put into mind, because the people in charge sometimes wanted to be responsible, and those were the people to go get. But it wasn't even that sometimes when a very wise teacher is telling you something, he's not telling you something about anybody else. He's putting in your mind what you need to be doing. In other words, if you're put in charge of something, you better be responsible for it. Because if you're not going to be a great leader. You don't have anyone to blame for the failures but yourself. And you need to work at it. And you never have to work alone. That's the thing we have to remember. We're not in this by ourselves. Remember, we read that we're interdependent upon each other. So we're all in this together. But the very last paragraph here, it says, the point is, you have already been given positions of leadership. Opportunities to lead will always be available to you to develop your leadership skills. Learning the skills to be an effective leader is now an important step toward your positive growth and development. So with that in mind right there, that's where we left off. So we want to go back to procedure 4 because that's really where we're at. But I wanted to read that first before we go into the next part. And we're still in procedure 4, by the way. It's something that as you're speaking to students in your school, as you're speaking to peers in your community, or if you have a rehabilitation center you're working with, whatever you're doing, the most difficult thing you will find, and some of the greatest challenges you will find, is getting people to believe in themselves. Now, I don't mean telling them they're going to be Superman and nothing's going to hurt them, but getting them to believe they have the potential to accomplish something. And the reason being, I remember, and it seems like it was forever ago, when I was in high school, we didn't have dreams of being music stars or TikTok stars or YouTube. So whatever I don't even know what you call these people that get on the internet and make millions of dollars just doing stuff on the internet. The internet didn't even exist when I was in high school. It was before the internet. And I remember our dreams that were very far-fetched was, I'm going to go to NBA or I'm going to go to NFL. That's what I'm going to do for a living. And no, I had one person I was in high school with that went to the NFL. And he was very much more athletic than anybody else that I'd ever been around. He was very different. And to show you how fast dreams fall apart, he went to the NFL, became one of a very popular NFL team. His very first punt that he caught, he got hit in the knee and it destroyed his knee and he never played again. He caught one punt and his career got ended that fast. And, I of course, by that time I had already started working in the career I was in by the time he did that, because he was just a year ahead of me. But that shows how fast you can think you want your dream and you can get your dream, and your dream is a nightmare. Always remember that. Your dreams can be nightmares. So if you're dreaming of something, try to dream of something positive, okay? And I mean goals in life. That's what I'm talking about. Not going to bed at night and, dreaming that you're this, the next president of the United States, which I'm not for sure that's a dream. And that sounds like that's more of a nightmare. But here in procedure 4, explain that leadership does not always mean having a specific position. In other words, it's not always identified as a CEO, a president, and so forth. Leadership is primarily being able to take the initiative to make positive decisions based on facts and standing firm even in the face of opposition. And I'll give you an example. I attend many meetings, internationally even, and I deal with many boards of organizations on an international level. And even here in our local community, we have groups of people who meet. And it's possible that you can be in a room of 20, 30 people, and every person in that room is a leader. It's possible to be sitting in this class right now, and every person is a leader. Every person is training to be a teacher. It's possible because it's taking place. We literally see that taking place with what we do and how it's being done. And we kind of think of it a little differently when you see students sitting in a classroom, but that's the whole idea of going to school, is to be educated on how to do something. Otherwise, there'd be no reason to go to school. You don't go there to hang out. You don't go there to, enjoy the gymnasium, so to speak, or whatever else. You go there for education. That's why you're supposed to go. There might be people that go there for other things, but that's the purpose of it. But here it says, have students turn to page 154 through 156 in their handbooks to read the section entitled, Can You Be a Leader? And What Makes a Leader a Leader? Choose students to read the 2 short stories about Tim and Kelly found on page 155. Discuss their leadership qualities and qualities based on the following character traits. Notice here, responsibility, initiative, courage, and determination. So we're going to discuss what Tim and Kelly did, their decisions they made, and you're going to kind of center it around the responsibility, initiative, courage, and determination. All of those things being extremely important. So looking over here to page 155, at the very top of the page, it says, read the following accounts of how leadership played an important role in the lives of Kelly and Tim. And of course, here's two separate stories, both of them obviously being educated in the peaceful solution. Now, Tim's story says, I don't know what would have went down if I wasn't there. I don't know that it would have been bad. Jamal and his crew are thugs. They're always dissing people and putting them down. Anyway, that day in the cafeteria, they started messing with Steve, talking about his family and all. Steve started getting mad. He started to yell back and lose control. So I walked over to Steve and told him to calm down. It's only words. It's not worth getting into a fight over. Steve took my advice and walked away. Steve now deals with situations like this in a peaceful way and talks to others about it too. And you think about what took place here, that's a very simple story to read. Everything in it is very correct on the decisions that were made, but think about how easy is it to do that, especially if someone's talking about your family. Remember, that's when I was going to school, that was like the worst thing you could do was talk about somebody's family. But we think about the sad part about it is, and I want you to imagine this and really get this into your students' minds. Why do we get upset when people talk bad about our families? But when you hear somebody has said something about you that's bad, it's usually from your family. Where I got a huge family. I mean, it's huge. Makes up a community almost. And when you think about how would you feel if somebody said something negative about you? You would think somebody, and think about this, because here in this situation, obviously Jamal and his crew were thugs and dissing. I mean, they're always putting people down. But how many times do we put each other down, or can you put someone down, and really you don't even see the damage you're doing? And think about what we're doing to each other when we do that. If you do it. Not saying as though it's actually taking place on an everyday, but if it's done. Think about how much damage that causes. And then here you have Kelly's story. It says, the first summer I worked at Jake's Burger and Fries. I basically washed dishes, bussed tables, and took out the trash. I was always on time and worked with a positive attitude. By the end of summer, the manager asked me to work part-time during the school year. My mom gave me permission. A year later, I'm a manager in training. I'm allowed to open and close the restaurants as well as train the new employees. I'm glad I put into practice what I was taught by the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. I see the benefits of incorporating it into my life. I feel it taught me how to be a trustworthy and responsible person. I've seen this take place in my own life. Some young men that were trained in the Peaceful Solution they have moved on with their lives now, but due to the training that they received in the Peaceful Solution, are managing restaurants here in Abilene, actually. And it was their training and their upbringing that they got that set them apart and really was very different from the other employees that were in that store. And the person became a manager of a major restaurant here in Abilene. I think he's only 22 years old. But it was really his upbringing and what he was taught. And of course, these things you're taught stick with you when you practice them. Continuing on here, at the very bottom, it says it's your daily choices that determine your leadership skills. So once again, every day makes a difference. Every day in our lives, how we react to things, how we interact with other people. And you never know what the next day brings. It's something that it can be very difficult to get into the mind of a child, is especially teenagers, is that treat every day the best you can, because there's no guarantee that tomorrow will come. But I know when I was a teenager and all of my friends, we were going to live forever. Nothing going to take place. No way. We're going to make it through these 4 years of high school. It's going to be one big party. And I remember by the time high school ended for our class, 14 people had died out of that class due to drug overdoses, motorcycle accidents, car wrecks, and suicides, sadly. And when we all went into the 9th grade, I don't think any of us would have thought that. By the time school was over, man, it was like, wow, no one ever imagined that taking place. And then I remember even getting out of high school, being in my middle 20s and reading in the papers some of the people I went to high school dying. Dying from cancer. One person had a bad heart. And it's like, man, life is so short sometimes. So, part of being a leader is not looking at life like you're going to live forever, but looking at every day as how you're going to make a difference. And if you make a difference for many, 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 many days and you can think about doing that forever, that's a great thing. But you got to start with day one. If you're too busy looking at the end result of what you're going to do, you'll miss what it took to get there. So here on page 156, what makes a leader a leader? And you see over to the side here, you have a nurse holding a little baby boy, looks like. It says, well, Miss Smith, you have a 9-pound leader. That's a pretty big leader for that young man. Here it says, now that you know how important leadership is, do you know what makes an individual a leader? Do doctors pronounce a child a leader when he is born, or like they do his or her gender? You think about, I know people think about one of the greatest examples that is in today's society is the Prince of Saudi Arabia. Well, he was born into that role. Doesn't mean he knows how to be a leader. He had to go through much training on how to govern and conduct the interest and the goals, the vision of the country of Saudi Arabia from his father, who had to be taught by his father, who had to be taught by his father. So you might be born in a position where the opportunity is presented to you, but you still have to be taught how to do it. And then that doesn't mean people will stay on that same path. Continuing on. So once again, do doctors pronounce a child as a leader when it's born like they do his or her gender? You can tell this book wasn't written in the last 3 or 4 years, that's for sure. It's a boy, it's a girl, it's a leader. Or people wake up one morning and say, finally, I'm a leader. Well, what would cause you to do that? Win the lottery, maybe? I'm a leader now. I'm a millionaire. That's all it took for me to be a leader. Well, no, money doesn't fix problems either. It's one thing, and bring these things into your students' minds. Because there's a story of a man that helped develop Microsoft. And you can even use Steve Jobs, who helped develop Apple. But Paul Allen, he was there when Bill Gates started Microsoft. He became very prominent in sports industries. He bought the Seattle Seahawks and the Seattle Supersonics at the time, and he was well known, put stuff back in the community, and then he developed a certain cancer in the bone. And this man had bone marrow transplants multiple times trying to stay alive, and he had unlimited funding. And here you have a man that was extremely wealthy, and he wasn't able to preserve his life no more than my father, who died from cancer himself. One was a billionaire, one had worked his whole life, and they both ended up with the same results. So money won't fix problems either. What does that have to do with leadership? Well, prevention, and think about that as we're reading through here. Prevention. Remember that manual that kind of got thrown over the shoulder? There's a lot of people in society today, and we'll get to this, probably not at the end of this class. A lot of people suffer in society today because the people that were in roles of leadership did not teach people how to keep themselves safe. They didn't give directions on how to protect themselves and the environment around them. And people suffer greatly because of that. People suffer not because they were bad people, but because no one gave them instructions on what was right and what was wrong. So they did the best they could with what they knew. So can a positive leader actually help save lives? Absolutely. Can a negative leader cost people their life? 100%. They sure can. And it doesn't take a bomb. All it takes is a lack of giving directions or a lack of information. But continuing on here, it says, at what point do certain people realize that they have the potential to be leaders? And exactly what does it take to be a leader? And those are questions to pose to your class. And have discussion about it. Not that you have to have a long discussion, but literally see what they have to say. Because people have, it's always interesting to ask people what leadership skills are or who is the most popular leader, especially when you go outside the United States. We think we're the big dog, so to speak. But myself and Catan, we have traveled to a lot of places where there's no water, there's no electricity, nothing. And you ask these people, who is the most powerful nation in the world right now? Not one person has said the United States yet. They always mention every other country but the United States. And it's one of those things to where people only know what's put into their mind. Because, I told someone last night, I was speaking to from another country. They said, what is it like to live in the greatest country on the face of the earth? And I do believe the United States is the greatest country on the face of the earth. Greatest opportunities you can have. I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing here or sitting where I'm at right now if I wasn't in the United States. That, to me, is worth more than anything else. But the United States, this is due to leadership. It's the only reason I mentioned this before we move on. The United States has something that they can brag about and something that is embarrassing. And I was amazed how some people understood it. The United States is economically, due to its economy, the richest country on the face of the earth because of its economy. Due to its debt, it's the poorest country on the face of the earth. So the United States literally has the right to say they are the richest and poorest nation in the world. And who made those decisions? Leadership did. So, the economy's great, but when you're spending it faster than you're making it, it's not too great. Well, who did that? Leadership did that. Why? It wasn't to make the world a safer place, because it's not safer. And once again, money doesn't fix problems. Money is needed to develop and do things, but money doesn't fix problems. So think about that. Some will say that leaders are born, while others will say that leaders are made. This is the second paragraph. The truth is, however, is somewhere between these two extremes. As mentioned in chapter 1, people are born with specific character and personality traits. Let's turn back over to, I think it's entitled Heredity on page 12. Yeah. On page 12, and this is what it's referring to. It's talking about heredity. And if you remember all the way back into the character unit of the junior high series, we also talked about genetics and how these things help make up who we are, but it doesn't totally define who we are. So here on page 12 it says, before you were born, the combination of your parents' genes started forming your physical traits, such as the color of your eyes, skin, and hair. Did you know that genetics also is responsible for the behavior similarities you share with your parents and other family members? Has anyone ever told you that you act just like another family member? Have you ever noticed similar behavior traits between your friends and their families? Both positive and negative behavioral traits can be inherited, for example, humor and aggression. But unlike physical traits that are fixed and cannot be changed, behavioral traits can be altered. Inheriting negative qualities like aggression, for instance, does not mean you have to accept that as a permanent part of your character. Obviously, no one is a carbon copy of his or her parent or other family members. Each person, as he or she matures, becomes capable of making decisions that can alter his character. Therefore, each person can develop behavioral traits that are independent of the traits that he has inherited. So once again here, look and notice this at the very bottom. It says inherited behavioral traits such as aggression, notice, can be altered by choices. The power of a choice, that's how we alter them. The environment and influences that are presented in an individual's life. For example, a child who has a propensity for aggression can be trained to control his thoughts and actions to avoid acting aggressively. And looking back over here to page 156, keeping that in mind, as we said, as mentioned in chapter 1, people are born with specific character and personality traits. Some of these traits are important to becoming a leader. And of course, if you're an aggressive person, who would want an aggressive person as a leader? Someone who's always flying off the handle, who's ready to grab the gun before ready to sit down and have diplomacy. That's not somebody I would want to negotiate with at all. Somebody that only has their interest in mind and doesn't really concern themselves with the interest of everyone. Those are things that can be problematic. But of course, you have the other things, and discuss these things with your class to make sure they retain them. Ask them, what are some traits that are fixed? What does it mean to have a fixed trait? See what they say, eye color, hair color, and so forth, the shape of your nose, all of those things. You can surgically alter any of those things, but we're talking about things that are naturally done. And we'll get into this natural formation here in a second. But continuing on, it says, some of these traits are important to becoming a leader. For example, determination, courage, and outgoing personality are only a few of the traits that people are born with that could foster leadership skills. Foster, mold, shape, grow, put them in the right place, so to speak. These traits provide an excellent foundation for the development of a leader, but by themselves will not guarantee the ability to lead. Becoming an effective leader takes much more than just your innate qualities, and that's natural qualities, things you're born with. Continuing on, it says, in fact, there are many leaders who disclose that as children they were unpopular, introverted, and indecisive. I've met and I know people. Best teacher I ever met in my life was actually a very introverted person. In a classroom setting, very outspoken, very cordial, very engaging, but outside of a classroom setting, preferred a very private life. Didn't like big crowds, didn't want to be in big crowds, didn't want to be in you'd have never called them at the social clubs or the country clubs or all of those things. They were very much into education. And that's where they found themselves able to open up, was in front of a classroom or in front of an auditorium of people. But outside of that, very, very quiet and always looking at how to improve things through the educational standpoint. But not indecisive, was very decisive. But of course, you think about unpopular and think about just for your own life and think about, because this is what children are going through and this is what people are doing right now. It's, for example, if you have a group of students, try to explain this to them and have them see this. And this is a perfect way of seeing it. Right now, since the administration of the president has come in, or is coming in, it's being formed right now. His administration is being developed. Senator Rubio has become Secretary of State. And then you'll see all of these other parts of his administration, which is huge, by the way. And these are influencers. These are people that go to the president to influence him to make decisions concerning whatever area they work in. And that's really why politicians are so concerned with kind of dragging it out, because they know the person that goes into that part of the administration, their ideology is going to precede most people's ideology, because that's why they're being put there, is to be an influencer. And as this goes on, watch how this drags out. Watch how they can take up to, I think, 30 hours on each vote, and they'll drag it out that much. And it's not, and watch very carefully, because this takes place every time. All of these things get dragged out, but very few times do they turn down putting that person into office. It's being drug out to see, well, okay, what will you give me for voting for this guy? What am I going to get out of putting your man in office? You need my vote, so what am I going to get? Now, do you think a positive or a negative leader operates like that? Yeah, very negative. And I'm not making any comment about what's going on I don't know who's voting for who right now in D.C. I just know it's hilarious. I've watched it many times myself. In my life, I've watched it just numerous times. And it's always that way. And I've been to D.C., Washington, D.C. many times, and we've sat and watched senators, what they say, pork barrel. In other words, I know you need my vote, but what are you going to get to me? I gotta get votes again when I go up for election too. What do I get out of this? And they load all of this garbage into we need clean water over here. And you see the bill and it's that thick. And the clean water part's about that thick. The rest of it's where they load it up with everybody wanting stuff. Now, is that a positive or a negative way of doing things? Because I know, and I won't name them, but I know there's other peaceful solution instructors that were there. I asked one time, how do you guys read bills that are like this thick? Huge. And you're the leaders that are making decisions for our country. And by the way, it's very impressive. If you've never seen those bills when they're ran through the presses and they print them out and they bind them, and every congressman and every senator gets a copy, that's an enormous expense, by the way, because it's not done cheaply. And I didn't find one person that said they even read them. I found people that say, I have staff members that do that. The staff member reads it, and they influence the person that can vote on what they need to vote for. And what do they want? Well, I just want to know what I wanted. Is that in the bill? I don't care what's in the rest of it. And why do we bring that up? Because now you know why you're $35 trillion in debt. That's how it works. Positive leaders and negative leaders bring this about. Just think about that. And I'm definitely not here to put down our government. Once again, the United States is the greatest place on the face of the earth to live. Many opportunities. And after traveling to many countries, I definitely would not want to live anywhere else, to be honest with you. I'd want to live in the United States. It's a lot more opportunity here, even in education. But continuing along, but you really want these things to be in their mind because it's a great opportunity in current events for children and young people and even adults to see this. If you've never seen it, pay close attention to how this works out. And think about the leadership skills we're talking about. And how are these decisions made? Are they making decisions based on the people that put them in office, actually? Or is it really just, make $225,000 a year with benefits? Continuing on here, though. Becoming an effective leader takes much more than just your internet qualities, the things you're born with. In fact, there are many leaders who disclose that as children they were unpopular, introverted, and indecisive. In other words, they did not have the natural determination, boldness, and charisma that is characterized by many leaders. These qualities, however, can be cultivated over time by a combination of various factors. So once again, it can be grown. It can be honed into shape, so to speak. It can be developed. Anyone can do this. I know right now there's people sitting in this auditorium who I see in every class, never miss a class. And the only thing that keeps them from teaching right now is just the nervousness of getting up in front of people. And that's it. But everything they need is right there. And if you can figure out how to get everything from here to here, let me know, because I've never figured that out yet. There's a lot of times you can teach a class and you have all these things going through your mind. And a lot of them don't really pertain to, it's things that you could bring in, but it doesn't really help because you're trying to paint a picture. And I don't care how many times you teach a class, you'll always hear, I've been through this book many times with the other instructors. And every time I watch classes of the other instructors, I always hear something I needed to hear. I always learn something. And I've seen students of the Peaceful Solution take the very same lesson plans that we've taught, go exactly as we say do it, but yet they teach something that was there that I never thought of, and it was something I needed to hear. I learned a lot from them. There's experiences that everyone has been through in their life that you will be able to use to help develop not only your own leadership skills, but help other people. It's like I said, I enjoy going into prisons and teaching, but I don't have a clue what it's like to spend a night in prison. And I don't want to know what it's like to spend a night in prison. But I know many peaceful solution instructors that found out about the peaceful solution in correctional facilities. And I know a lot of them that are really great teachers right now too. And I know people that's never been in a prison facility, but they've been in other aspects of life. And they have everything they need. And one of the most nerve-wracking things can be being in front of people. Afraid you're going to say something wrong. You don't have to worry about mispronouncing words or stumbling when you're reading. I do that all the time, so you don't have to worry about that. People are used to that. But getting up in front of a group of people, sometimes you forget that you're really sitting up in front of a group of friends. And it's part of this leadership when, even though this stage is elevated and you look down at people, well, it's only because that's the way the auditorium is laid out. It's not so you can look down at people as the person sitting up on the stage is the highest person. No, we're all learning together. And whenever you can really set in your mind, when you're speaking to people, when you're teaching a class, you're speaking to friends, not enemies. That's not how you teach a class. You're speaking to friends, and everybody's trying to do this together. Imagine if you could get the Congress and Senate to start going through peaceful solution classes. Just imagine what it would be like if you could get the Knesset, or even go into Moscow, or even into China, which has an enormous political arena there. Imagine what it would be like if you could get leaders to actually start turning the gears with things based on morality. Imagine what we could do in society. And people can say, they already know these things. It doesn't show. It doesn't show at all. It shows there's a lack of knowledge of these things. And that's why people are being destroyed because of this. Once again, turn the minds of your students. As it says here, these qualities, however, can be cultivated over time. If you know what to cultivate, plow up a field, maneuver the soil around, you got to turn it, and you got to work with it. Continuing on here, it says, for example, your experiences, environment, and role models all contribute in developing your leadership qualities. For example, someone who is shy and introverted might be encouraged by a parent or mentor to take a class in public speaking. That individual could then gain enough confidence to become more outgoing in other areas of his or her life. He or she might be inclined to raise his or her hand in class and eventually volunteer to be in charge of a group project. In charge/responsible. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with being over something. Continuing on, it says, of course, this is only one example of how someone might discover that they have the potential to lead others. There are many other ways that people gain understanding and insight into their strengths and abilities in regards to leadership. In fact, many people in leadership positions initially felt that they were unable to handle their new responsibilities. However, with encouragement and time, they gained proficiency at leading others. But the first thing you have to remember, and always pull this in, it's just like respect. The first person you have to learn to lead is yourself. If you can't lead yourself, you're never going to lead anyone else. Unless you're leading yourself off a cliff, then you can get a lot of people to follow you off the cliff. But you're not being a positive leader by doing that. And I've seen, the author of The Peaceful Solution. I seen one time he took a 21-year-old boy. That's exactly what he was a boy. Drug him out to Texas, not kicking and screaming, but literally taught that young man how to run a business at 21 years old and to develop a business. Boy had no idea how to build a business, had no idea anything about taxes, no idea about any of these things. And he didn't sit there with him every day doing it either. He literally spent time just through engaging conversation a couple times a week to get it done. And, I've seen that through following his instructions, that person was able to develop a business and a successful business. But it was only because someone took the time not holding them by the hand, because he didn't have that kind of time to offer that person, but gave them instructions a little bit at a time, cultivating, not overwhelming the person, knowing the person was making, that's a really bad choice. I remember one time that person asked him, is that the wrong thing to do? And he goes, well, that was the wrong thing to do when you thought about it. And the person asked him, why didn't you tell me? He said, because you need to learn. He said, you'll never forget it now. And it cost that person quite a bit of money back when they first started. But the patience that was used just to develop it. And what did that person that was the leader, what did he get out of it? Nothing financially, just knowing that he helped do something to benefit another cause. That was it. Didn't get anything out of it that anybody, well, I'm not getting money out of this, I'm not doing it. No, just wanted to be a better person in someone else's life, and did it in many people's lives. And many people can testify and have testimonies they can offer to that. But think about how your words, just a few words a week, can make a difference in someone else's life that you don't even know how much you're affecting them in a positive way. Could be the negative way also, but it really works that way. I've seen it with my own eyes, how just someone gently leading someone, it really can make a huge difference in someone's life, more than we actually see that we're doing. I've had people come back and tell me that they've done stuff, and man, I went and did this because you said I should try it, and I did it, and everything's working out. And I'm looking down like, I don't even remember even talking about that. And it's one of those deals where it was a brief conversation for me, and the person was already going the right direction, though. And they just wanted someone to kind of solidify it for them. It was the right thing to do. So they're already developing those leadership skills themselves. They just wanted a confirmation that, hey, this is what I should be doing, right? Well, you're not hurting anyone. You're not hurting yourself, someone else, or the environment, so there can't be anything wrong with it. That's the positive way to look at it. But continuing on here, it says in the second paragraph, some people are born with certain traits that are conducive to leadership. This is called being a natural leader. The innate abilities, you're kind of born with these things, it's natural, along with the right environment, that's extremely important, encouragement and opportunities can help one develop into a leader. I've also heard the author of The Peaceful Solution speaking at engagements where he said that, and he's proven it, you can take someone and develop them to being a positive person. You can also, through influence and treating someone in a negative way, destroy something that could have actually been really beneficial to society and really set people back to the point where they have major problems. So we can do either one. So it's very important that we consider how much our words affect others in their minds and in their everyday engagement of activities. It says, if, however, you are not in this category, you can still learn how to overcome any trait that could keep you from becoming an effective leader. For example, the person who is shy and introverted can learn to be more outgoing. The person who lacks courage can learn to overcome their fears. I'll tell you a certain trick that took place and is still evolving. I had someone ask me, you travel to many Spanish-speaking countries, but you don't speak Spanish. And no, I don't speak Spanish fluently. But they do make earpieces you give another person, and it translates everything for you. And you can have a conversation with anyone. You can have a group conversation, actually. You can hold a board meeting with people, and everyone is being translated in their ear, just like at the UN. So if you want a dime on how it's actually done, that's how we do it. I still haven't found the one that will translate for Uganda, though. I'm still looking for that one. But that's how it's done. Technology can be really wonderful. And if you can speak another language, I know there's young people here that speak multiple languages. I know of a young man here that speaks at least 2 languages. And he's 12, 13, 14 years old and already speaks 2 languages, fluently speaks 2 languages. That's very impressive, that people can do that. You know, I knew one teacher of the Peaceful Solution who taught me a lot over my life. He spoke 6 languages. I don't think he spoke them all fluently, but he spoke them well enough where he could communicate with anybody. And I know older people that here in the Peaceful Solution speak multiple languages. They can do it fluently. And I tell you, that's a great thing. It's a really great thing when you can do that, because leadership and diplomacy with other nations, well, you can't exactly, and it's really rude. You know, I think about this a lot when I travel to other countries, whether they speak French, Spanish, Mandarin, or whatever. You know, it's very rude to go to a country and expect them to speak English. It's really rude. Imagine if someone came here to meet with you and they expected you to speak their language for that one meeting, by the way. You know, it's you think about that can be insulting and demoralizing, but there are some benefits to technology. There's some horrendous things with technology, but there's some benefits. Here you see the very last part of this. Take a bite out of this. Positive leaders rise to the occasion. They do the right thing when it needs to be done. You know, and as I've learned, the reason I bring that up about that is when you think something is just totally impossible, but yet you had a leader that said, well, that's your problem. Go figure out how to get it done. Well, there's a lot of times you don't have to figure it out. You just have to find the things that help you get it done. You just have to find those things that will help you communicate. And I can tell you, I have found, you know, and I'm not, you know, I'm not, well, how do I say this without, I'm not putting down any child, okay, especially my own. But I have found sometimes it's easier to communicate with someone that can't speak your own language than it is to communicate with a teenager. Because when I was a teenager, I was the smartest person I knew. And it was only after I got older that I realized I'm a pretty ignorant person. And then when I got older, I realized I'm a very ignorant person. But I thought I was really smart when I was 14, 15 years old. Man, I knew everything. And I only come to find out, man, I didn't really know much at all. And I would never forget the author of The Peaceful Solution one time said in a speaking engagement, you know, your teacher's never wrong. If they're in class and they're telling you to, unless they're telling you to do something that's immoral, they're telling you to hurt yourself, someone else, or the environment, don't argue with your teacher. And it really stuck in my mind when people are trained in areas. Before you want to argue about what something might be going wrong, educate yourself in what's going on. And that requires you to talk to someone, to learn, to find out. With this character education we're speaking of and the things that we're looking to develop, you know, the next thing we're going to cover here on page 158, we'll get into procedure 5. I think it's going to be David. David, if he's able to. If not, I think it's going to be William. But either one teach very well. And this is right down both of their alley. We'll be in procedure 5 on page 158, and it's the skills of leadership. And if you remember back into the acceptance unit when we talked about diplomacy, and if you've never talked to a diplomat, you know, I've always been impressed by dealing with ambassadors. They have a way of just making everything seem like bubblegum and rainbows or whatever you want to call it. Everything just seems great. Went into a place, and I think we've told the story before, we wanted to get video. They confiscated everything we had, and we thought they were the greatest people on the face of the earth. And we didn't get to do anything we wanted, and they told us no without saying no. And they literally made us feel like they were protecting us the whole time. But in reality, the answer was no, you can't record the interview. But they didn't say it that way. But that's what it turned out. And we left out the embassy before we realized, oh, they just didn't want us to record the video of the interview. That's the only thing they didn't want. That was the nicest way I've ever heard of saying no. And they did a great job. The next class, once again, we're going to pick up on page 158, Procedure 5 in the Building More Excellence unit, will be this coming Sunday. It'll be January 26th at 5:30 p.m. Don't miss this class. It's really great in helping to develop leadership skills. At this time, thank all of you for joining us, and we're going to close.